Have you ever wondered what would happen if you sacrificed everything to help a stranger? 16-year-old Benjamin Hayes was just trying to make it through another day, struggling to help his single mom pay the bills, worried about keeping his minimum wage job, and battling the worst winter storm his town had seen in decades. He never intended to be a hero. He was just a kid with barely enough money to cover his own family's needs. But when he spotted an elderly homeless veteran shivering in an alley that fateful afternoon, something compelled him to stop. Benjamin had no idea that this simple act of kindness, spending his entire paycheck to help a freezing stranger, would cost him his job, nearly get his family evicted, and then lead to an unbelievable twist of fate. A twist involving a mysterious millionaire, a long-lost brother, and an envelope containing $500,000 cash. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales. Sometimes karma delivers justice in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, being kind to the right person at the right moment can change your life forever. The bitter winter wind howled through the streets of Ridgewood as 16-year-old Benjamin Hayes pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. Snow pelted his face, each flake feeling like a tiny needle against his skin. The weatherman had called it the worst storm in decades, but that hadn't stopped Westridge High from holding classes as usual. Benjamin checked his watch and quickened his pace. His shift at Dale's grocery started in 20 minutes, and Mr. Dale wasn't known for his patience. 3 employees had already been let go this month due to budget cuts, and Benjamin couldn't afford to give his boss any reason to add him to that list. Not when his mom was already working double shifts at the hospital just to keep the lights on. He was about to cross the street when he noticed a huddled figure in the alleyway between the pharmacy and the laundromat. At first, Benjamin thought it might be a pile of discarded clothes, but then he saw movement, a trembling hand extending from beneath a snow-covered blanket. Benjamin hesitated, glancing at his watch again. He couldn't be late. The money from this job was the only thing helping his mom make ends meet since Dad walked out 2 years ago. But something pulled him toward the alley. Something stronger than his fear of losing his job. "Hello," Benjamin called out, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay?" The blanket shifted, revealing the weathered face of an elderly man. His beard was frozen, lips blue from the cold, and his eyes. Benjamin would never forget those eyes. They held decades of pain, yet somehow still flickered with dignity. "I'm fine, son," the man rasped, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Just resting a bit." Benjamin knelt down, the snow immediately soaking through his jeans. "You can't stay out here. It's 15 degrees and dropping." "Got nowhere else to be," the man replied with a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The shelter's full on account of the storm." Benjamin noticed the man's fingers were bare, raw and red from exposure. Without thinking, he pulled off his own gloves and offered them. "I'm Benjamin." The man stared at the gloves for a long moment before accepting them with trembling hands. Frank Winters, 68 years young, though I don't feel it today." He attempted to laugh, but it dissolved into a hacking cough that shook his entire body. "Mr. Winters, when was the last time you ate something?" Benjamin asked, noticing how Frank's coat hung loose on his frame. Frank's eyes dropped. "Been a couple days. Had some bad luck. Someone took my backpack at the shelter, had my medication and what little money I had saved up." Benjamin's heart sank. He'd heard his mother talk about her patients who couldn't afford their heart medications, how dangerous it could be if they missed doses. "What kind of medication?" "Heart stuff. Got a bum ticker from Nam." Frank tapped his chest. "Doc says I need it, but the VA's been slow with the refills." Benjamin checked his watch again. He was definitely going to be late now. But looking at Frank, this veteran who had served his country only to end up freezing in an alley, Benjamin knew what he had to do. "Can you walk, Mr. Winters? There's a diner just around the corner." Frank shook his head. "Don't need your charity, son." "It's not charity," Benjamin said firmly. "It's respect. My grandfather was in Vietnam too." Something in Frank's eyes softened at that. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, and Benjamin helped him to his feet. Frank was lighter than he looked, and Benjamin could feel the man's bones through his threadbare coat as they shuffled toward Mel's diner. The blast of warm air as they entered the diner made Benjamin realize just how cold he'd been. The few patrons glanced up, some with sympathy, others with thinly veiled disgust, as Benjamin guided Frank to a booth in the corner. Liz, the waitress who'd graduated with Benjamin's mom years ago, approached with menus and a concerned expression. "Everything okay, Benji?" "Yeah, Liz. Could we get some coffee? Something hot?" She nodded, her eyes lingering on Frank's disheveled appearance before hurrying off to the kitchen. Frank looked around nervously. "Don't usually come to places like this anymore. People don't like looking at reminders of what could happen to them." "Don't worry about them," Benjamin said. "Order whatever you want." Frank hesitated, then ordered the special, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy. Benjamin got just a coffee, earning a questioning look from Frank. "Not hungry," Benjamin lied, ignoring the growl in his stomach. He'd used his lunch money to buy a birthday card for his mom earlier that day. As they waited for the food, Frank slowly opened up. He'd been a medic in Vietnam, had saved countless lives. He'd come home to a country that wanted to forget the war and the men who fought it. He'd married his high school sweetheart, had a decent job as a mechanic for 30 years until arthritis made it impossible to work. Wife passed 6 years ago. "Cancer," Frank said softly. "Medical bills took the house. Kids are spread out, got their own troubles. You stop asking for help after a while, you know." Benjamin didn't know, not really, but he nodded anyway. His mom always said sometimes the most important thing you can do is just listen. When the food arrived, Frank ate slowly, savoring each bite like it might be his last. Benjamin sipped his coffee, mind racing. His phone buzzed, a text from his boss. "Where are you?" "Last warning." Benjamin texted back that he had a family emergency, knowing full well it might cost him his job. But watching Frank regain some color in his cheeks, Benjamin couldn't bring himself to leave. After Frank finished eating, Benjamin made a decision. "Wait here, Mr. Winters. I'll be right back." He hurried across the street to the pharmacy. His paycheck had been deposited that morning, $212.47, meant for helping with the electric bill that was already past due. Benjamin swallowed hard and approached the pharmacist. "Excuse me, how much would a refill of heart medication cost without insurance?" The pharmacist named a figure that made Benjamin's stomach drop. Almost his entire paycheck. But then he thought of Frank, of how he'd served his country only to be forgotten in an alley. "I'll pay for it," Benjamin said, sliding his debit card across the counter. While waiting for the prescription, Benjamin bought the warmest pair of gloves the pharmacy had, along with a thick scarf and some hand warmers. By the time he returned to the diner, his bank account was nearly empty, but the relief on Frank's face when Benjamin handed him the pharmacy bag was worth every penny. "Son, I can't accept this," Frank protested, looking at the medication with disbelief. "You already did," Benjamin said simply. "Just promise me you'll take it, okay?" Tears welled in Frank's weathered eyes. Why would you do this for a stranger? Benjamin thought about his mother, how she'd raised him alone after his father left, how she never turned away anyone in need despite their own struggles. Because no one should have to choose between medicine and food, especially not someone who served our country. Frank clutched the medication to his chest. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Benjamin said. "Just take care of yourself, Mr. Winters." After paying for the meal, Benjamin walked Frank to the community center that had opened its doors as an emergency shelter for the storm. He made sure Frank was settled with his new gloves, scarf, and a promise from the volunteer coordinator to keep an eye on him. As Benjamin finally headed home, over 2 hours late for his shift, his phone rang. It was Mr. Dale, and the conversation was brief and final. Benjamin no longer had a job at the grocery store. The weight of what that meant hit him like a physical blow. The electric bill was due in 3 days. The rent was already late. His mom was counting on his contribution, small as it was. For a moment, standing alone in the swirling snow, Benjamin wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. But then he remembered Frank's eyes when he'd handed him the medication, the way the old veteran's hands had steadied as he clutched the pharmacy bag like a lifeline. Benjamin couldn't regret his choice, even as he wondered how he'd explain to his mom why their already precarious financial situation had just gotten worse. With a deep breath that crystallized in the frigid air, Benjamin turned toward home, the storm intensifying around him, unaware that his act of kindness had set in motion events that would change his life forever. Benjamin stood outside the door to the small 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his mother, key in hand, unable to bring himself to enter. His phone buzzed again, the 5th text from his former boss, each message growing progressively angrier, culminating in a final declaration that his last check would be mailed rather than direct deposited as a final punitive measure. The hallway light flickered overhead, a stark reminder of the building's deteriorating condition. The landlord, Mr. Rivera, had been patient with their late payments so far, but his kindness had limits. Benjamin knew their grace period was running thin. With a deep breath, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Ben, is that you?" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. Diane Hayes, 42, appeared in the doorway wearing scrubs from her day's shift at Memorial Hospital. Despite the exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes, she smiled warmly. "You're home late. Everything okay at the store?" Benjamin set his backpack down, avoiding her gaze. "Not exactly." Before he could explain, Diane's phone chimed. She glanced at the screen, her smile faltering. "That's odd. I just got a notification from the bank. Says our account is almost empty." She looked up, confusion clouding her features. "Did you need to withdraw something for school?" The moment of truth had arrived faster than Benjamin had anticipated. He sank onto the couch, the weight of his actions settling heavily on his shoulders. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Over the next few minutes, Benjamin recounted his encounter with Frank Winters, the Vietnam veteran freezing in the alley, the medication he couldn't afford, the meal that had brought color back to his cheeks. As he spoke, Benjamin couldn't read his mother's expression, which shifted between concern, surprise, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "So I spent the money," Benjamin finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "Almost all of it. And then, I lost my job because I was late." The silence that followed seemed endless. Benjamin stared at the worn carpet beneath his feet, waiting for the justified anger, the panic over bills they could no longer pay. Instead, he felt his mother's arms wrap around him, pulling him close. "You did the right thing," she whispered against his hair. Benjamin pulled back, confused. "But the bills, the rent, we needed that money." Diane cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Listen to me, Benjamin Hayes. Money comes and goes, but the man you're becoming, that's what matters. You saw someone in need and you helped, even knowing what it would cost you." She smiled sadly. "Your father never understood that some things are worth more than money. I'm so proud that you do." Relief flooded through Benjamin, though anxiety still gnawed at his stomach. "But what are we going to do now?" Diane sighed, her momentary pride giving way to the practical concerns of their situation. "I'll pick up some extra shifts. Maybe Rita and pediatrics will let me cover for her this weekend. We'll figure it out." She squeezed his shoulder. "We always do." That night, Benjamin barely slept. Through the thin walls of their apartment, he could hear his mother on the phone, her voice hushed but urgent as she called the utility company, asking for an extension they both knew would likely be denied. Later, he heard her crying softly in her room. The quiet contained sobs of someone trying desperately not to be heard. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the blinds Benjamin had taped together after they broke last summer. He dragged himself to the kitchen, where a note from his mother waited on the counter. "Picked up an early shift. Leftover pasta in the fridge. Love you. P.S. Start looking for a new job today." Benjamin had just finished reheating the pasta when his phone rang, an unknown number. Thinking it might be a potential employer responding to one of the many applications he'd submitted over the past few months, he answered quickly. "Benjamin Hayes? This is Greta Thompson from Westridge Savings and Loan." Benjamin's heart sank. Greta was his boss's wife, but she also managed the bank where they kept their modest checking account. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson," he said cautiously. "I'm calling about your account," she continued, her voice professionally detached. "There's been a flag raised by our system." Benjamin gripped the phone tighter. "Is something wrong?" "There was a substantial withdrawal yesterday, nearly the entire balance. Given your family's history of regular deposits and predictable spending patterns, the system flagged it as potentially fraudulent." "No, that was me," Benjamin admitted. "I needed to buy some medication for a friend." There was a pause on the line. "I see. Well, that's not actually why I'm calling, Benjamin. Your mother's automatic bill payment for your family's health insurance is scheduled for tomorrow. Without sufficient funds, it will be declined and your coverage will lapse." The room seemed to tilt beneath Benjamin's feet. His mother's diabetes medication cost over $800 without insurance. They couldn't afford a lapse in coverage. "There's nothing I can do?" he asked, voice cracking. Greta's tone softened slightly. "I'm afraid not. The payment amount is $347.22, and your current balance is $22.19. After hanging up, Benjamin sat motionless at the kitchen table, the untouched pasta growing cold before him. The magnitude of his choice the previous day was becoming clearer by the minute. Yes, he'd helped Frank Winters, possibly even saved his life, but at what cost to his own family? His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Dale's Grocery. Hope surged through Benjamin as he answered. "Hello, Benjamin, it's James Dale." His former boss's voice was clipped. "I've been reviewing our staffing situation, and I've decided to make some additional cuts." Benjamin's momentary hope evaporated. "Sir, you're not the only one I've had to let go." Greta was against it, but with the new supermarket opening across town, we're projecting a 30% drop in sales. Dale cleared his throat. "The point is, I've had to eliminate several positions, including the one I fired you from yesterday." "I understand," Benjamin said, unsure why Dale was calling just to twist the knife. "Thing is," Dale continued, his voice losing some of its edge, "I would have had to let you go anyway. At least this way, you'll be eligible for a better severance package than you would have received for cause." Benjamin blinked, confused. "Severance? 2 weeks' pay instead of just your final check?" Greta insisted. There was an awkward pause. She told me why you were late yesterday. About the old veteran." Benjamin didn't know what to say. "Anyway," Dale continued gruffly, "the check will be ready tomorrow. You can pick it up, or we can mail it." After hanging up, Benjamin felt a fleeting sense of relief. 2 weeks' pay would cover the insurance premium at least. But what about after that? The rent was already 10 days late, with a final notice taped to their door just yesterday. Even with this unexpected reprieve, they were still sinking. The rest of the day passed in a blur of worry and regret. Benjamin applied for jobs online, walked to 3 local businesses with help wanted signs, and even called his distant aunt in Ohio to see if she knew of any opportunities. By evening, he had nothing to show for his efforts except sore feet and deepening anxiety. When his mother returned home that night, the strain of her double shift evident in her slumped shoulders, Benjamin told her about the severance pay. Her relief was palpable but short-lived. "That's wonderful, Ben. It will cover the insurance at least." She collapsed onto the couch, massaging her swollen ankles. "I spoke to Mr. Rivera today. He's been more than patient, but he needs the rent by Friday or—" She didn't finish the sentence. "She didn't have to. I'll find something, Mom. I promise." Diane nodded. Though they both knew jobs for 16-year-olds weren't exactly plentiful in their struggling town, especially not ones that paid enough to make a difference in their situation. The knock at the door startled them both. Diane frowned, checking the time. Who could that be at this hour? Benjamin opened the door to find Mr. Rivera himself, their landlord's usually friendly face grave. "Mrs. Hayes, Benjamin," he said with a nod. "May I come in?" Diane straightened, her nurse's professional demeanor sliding into place despite her exhaustion. "Of course, Mr. Rivera." The landlord entered, declining the offered seat. "I'll be brief. I received a call today from the bank." He held up an official-looking letter. "Your building has been sold to Blackwood Properties. Effective immediately." "Blackwood Properties?" Diane echoed, confusion evident in her voice. "I don't understand." "Neither do I, to be honest," Mr. Rivera admitted. "They made an offer last year, and I refused. Then suddenly today, they doubled their offer. I couldn't turn it down, my wife's medical bills." He trailed off, looking genuinely regretful. "The new owners want to renovate. All current tenants have 48 hours to vacate." 48 hours? Benjamin burst out. "That's not legal. There are laws about eviction notices." Mr. Rivera shook his head sadly. "Normally, yes. But your rent is already in default, and my agreement with Blackwood included their right to immediate possession of all units with delinquent payments." He pulled another envelope from his pocket. "I did negotiate this for you. 1 month's rent refunded to help with relocation costs." He handed the envelope to Diane, who took it with trembling hands. "I'm truly sorry," Mr. Rivera said, backing toward the door. "If there was any other way." After he left, Diane opened the envelope to find $850, exactly 1 month's rent. Under different circumstances, it might have seemed like a windfall. Now, it was barely enough to cover a security deposit on a new place, if they could even find one willing to rent to them with their credit history. "Mom," Benjamin's voice sounded small, even to his own ears. Diane took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and offered him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll figure it out." She glanced around their small apartment, at the photos on the walls, the secondhand furniture they'd slowly collected. "We'll start packing tonight. Tomorrow I'll call some extended-stay motels, see what they charge by the week." They worked in near silence, packing their belongings into whatever containers they could find: grocery bags, old suitcases, a few cardboard boxes salvaged from behind the liquor store. As Benjamin carefully wrapped his father's old baseball trophies, the only things the man had left behind when he walked out, he wondered whether his act of kindness toward Frank Winters had somehow cursed his family, setting in motion this cascade of disasters. By midnight, most of their lives had been reduced to bags and boxes stacked by the door. Diane had finally fallen asleep on the couch, too exhausted to make it to her bedroom. Benjamin covered her with a blanket before slipping out onto the small balcony that overlooked the street. The night was clear now, stars visible above the streetlights. Somewhere out there, Benjamin hoped, Frank Winters was warm and safe, his heart steadily beating thanks to the medication Benjamin had sacrificed so much to provide. The thought provided little comfort as Benjamin contemplated the uncertainty that awaited his family in the morning. He didn't know that just a few miles away, events were unfolding that would transform their lives in ways he could never imagine. Dawn broke with cruel indifference to the Hayes family's plight. Benjamin had barely slept, his mind racing with impossible solutions to their sudden homelessness. He'd finally dozed off around 4 a.m., only to jolt awake at 6 when his mother's alarm rang for her early shift. "I called in sick," Diane said, already dressed and hovering over a stack of boxes. "We need to find a place to stay before nightfall." Benjamin nodded, the weight of their situation crushing down on his shoulders. If only he hadn't stopped that day. If only he'd just walked past Frank Winters like everyone else did. No, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping the veteran. Whatever karma had in store for them, at least he'd done the right thing. "I'll check the mailbox," Benjamin offered, needing a moment alone to compose himself. Maybe Dale sent the severance check early. Outside, the morning air was crisp, birds singing as if nothing was wrong with the world. Benjamin trudged to the communal mailboxes at the entrance of the apartment complex, fishing the small key from his pocket. Most days, their box contained nothing but bills and flyers. Today would likely be no different, but it gave him something to do besides pack up the remnants of their crumbling lives. Box 16 opened with its usual reluctant squeak. Inside lay a single certified letter marked urgent and a small white business card. Benjamin's heart sank. Another final notice, no doubt. He tucked both into his pocket and turned to head back to the apartment when a sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. Benjamin froze, watching as the driver exited and opened the rear door. A tall, distinguished man in his early 70s emerged, leaning heavily on a polished ebony cane. Despite his obvious physical frailty, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. His sharp eyes scanned the building before landing on Benjamin. "Young man," he called, his voice surprisingly strong. "Might you be Benjamin Hayes?" Benjamin's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." The elderly man smiled, revealing perfect white teeth that contrasted with his weathered face. "Excellent. Victor Blackwood." He extended a manicured hand. "I believe we have matters to discuss." Benjamin's mind reeled. Blackwood, the same name as the property company forcing them out. Was this man here to personally oversee their eviction? "My mother's inside," Benjamin managed, shaking the offered hand out of ingrained politeness. "Wonderful. Let's not keep her waiting." Before Benjamin could process what was happening, Victor Blackwood was striding toward their apartment, his driver following a respectful distance behind carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Inside, Diane Hayes stood amidst the packed boxes, confusion evident on her face as Benjamin entered with their unexpected visitors. "Mrs. Hayes," Victor greeted her warmly. "A pleasure to meet you. I'm Victor Blackwood." Recognition flashed in Diane's eyes. "The real estate developer? Your company bought this building." Victor nodded. "Among others. Though that's not why I'm here today." He gestured to one of the few remaining unpacked chairs. "May I?" Diane nodded warily, and Benjamin noticed how his mother subtly positioned herself between him and their visitors, protective even now. Once seated, Victor fixed Benjamin with an appraising look. "2 days ago, you encountered a homeless man named Frank Winters. You purchased medication for him, fed him, and ensured he had shelter for the night. Benjamin blinked in surprise. How do you know about that? Victor smiled sadly. Because Frank Winters is my brother. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Your brother? Diane finally asked. Victor nodded, his composure slipping slightly. His real name is Francis Blackwood. We fought in Vietnam together, but when we returned, Francis struggled. PTSD wasn't recognized then as it is now. He self-medicated with alcohol, pushed everyone away. Victor's eyes grew distant. After my wife died, he disappeared completely. That was 6 years ago. Benjamin's mind raced. But why was he living on the streets if you're... He gestured vaguely at Victor's obviously expensive suit. Wealthy? Victor supplied with a humorless chuckle. That's the question that's haunted me for years. I've had private investigators searching for him, but he's skilled at remaining invisible when he wants to be. Victor's driver stepped forward, opening the briefcase to reveal a folder of documents and a sealed manila envelope. Victor took the folder and continued. 3 weeks ago, one of my investigators spotted him. Rather than approaching directly, which had spooked Francis before, he simply observed, hoping to establish a pattern that might help us connect. And then, Victor looked directly at Benjamin. He witnessed something extraordinary. A young man stopping to help when everyone else walked by. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably under Victor's gaze. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Victor countered firmly. You did. And in doing so, you may have saved his life in more ways than one. Victor extracted a photograph from the folder. Frank Winters, cleaned up and almost unrecognizable in hospital clothes, sleeping peacefully in a private room. My brother suffered a minor heart attack the night after you helped him. The medication you provided likely prevented it from being fatal. When he was brought to the hospital, my investigator was finally able to approach him. Victor's voice thickened with emotion. After 6 years, I finally got to speak with my brother again. Diane reached out instinctively, touching Victor's arm in a gesture of compassion that transcended their vastly different circumstances. I'm so glad. Victor composed himself. Which brings me to the reason for my visit. He turned to his driver, who handed him the manila envelope. Benjamin, your act of kindness came at great personal cost. You lost your job, and I understand you're now losing your home. Benjamin nodded warily, unsure where this was heading. I received troubling news yesterday, Victor continued. Terminal cancer. 6 months, perhaps a year. He stated this clinical fact with remarkable composure. It puts things in perspective, makes one consider what legacy to leave behind. He handed the envelope to Benjamin. This is for you. With trembling fingers, Benjamin opened it, pulling out an official-looking document and a bank check for $500,000. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Victor assured her, gesturing toward the document in Benjamin's hands. That's the deed to this apartment building. I've established a trust that will cover all property taxes and maintenance fees for the next 20 years. The building now belongs to you, Mrs. Hayes. Benjamin couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Why would you do this? Victor's expression softened. Because you showed kindness to a stranger when it cost you everything. Because in this cynical world, that kind of genuine compassion should be rewarded. He paused. And because I want to leave something good behind when I go. He stood, retrieving his cane. The check is yours, no strings attached. For Benjamin's education, for your security, for whatever you need. He handed Benjamin the business card he'd found in the mailbox. And should you be interested, there's a position waiting for you at Blackwood Industries when you finish school. My brother specifically requested that. As Victor turned to leave, Diane found her voice. Wait, please. This is too much. We can't possibly. Victor held up a hand. In my experience, Mrs. Hayes, true kindness ripples outward, touching lives in ways we never anticipate. Your son's compassion brought my brother back to me in my final days. His eyes shone with unshed tears. There is no price tag for that gift. After Victor departed, Benjamin and Diane sat in stunned silence, the check and property deed between them on the coffee table. Mom, Benjamin finally whispered, is this real? Diane picked up the check with shaking fingers, examining it, as if her nursing training might help her diagnose its authenticity. It appears to be. Benjamin suddenly remembered the certified letter in his pocket. He pulled it out, tearing it open. Inside was a handwritten note. Benjamin, you saved my life yesterday. I've been invisible to this world for years. Your kindness reminded me that humanity still exists. My brother tells me you lost your job helping me, that your family is struggling. Know this. No good deed goes unrewarded. Sometimes, karma works in mysterious ways. Francis Blackwood, Frank Winters. Diane read the note over Benjamin's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. All those years I told you kindness matters most. I never imagined it would save us like this. Benjamin stared out the window at the departing limousine. Just 48 hours ago, he'd stopped to help a homeless veteran, never expecting anything in return. Now their lives had transformed completely. As Benjamin helped his mother unpack the boxes they'd so frantically filled the night before, he thought about Frank Winters. No, Francis Blackwood, and the unexpected ways lives could intersect. How a single moment of compassion could ripple outward, touching everything in its path. The $500,000 would secure their future. The building deed would ensure they always had a home. But the greatest gift was the knowledge that in this often harsh world, kindness still mattered. It still had power. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the universe finds a way to balance the scales.